Howdy. Welcome back to the Philosophy Forum. This is the third question and answer. And today I have some questions from Chris Kramer. Okay, here's the first question. How does one devise a good question? Well, isn't that meta? I'm inclined to say it's almost so abstract that it requires context. I don't know if that's answerable. So I guess there's something. A good question involves enough context for it to have a good answer. How does one devise a good question? With good words. Okay, next question. How does one live a good life? From an objective viewpoint, doing no harm at a minimum comes to mind. But truly, that's not even possible and sounds rather lame and minimal even if it was. What is a good life? Should we care? Well, I think absolutely we should care. You wouldn't be asking this question if we didn't all care about it. I mean, this is such a big question, I don't know where to start quite. I'm afraid that because of the breadth of it, the answer will again be too abstract. So I think, on the one hand, we have pretty clear examples of people who we think are living good lives, and I think that that's a good place to start. This is the way that Socrates would talk about something. Whenever someone would come up to him with a word like bravery or goodness and have a discussion about it, he would close in on what the definition could mean by asking them questions about, well, do you think in this sort of a situation that person's being brave? And they would have to figure out, why is it that it seems like, let's say, Martin Luther King led a good life? Why is it that maybe Thich Nhat Hanh led a good life? And then we can come around to certain actions that we see them performing. I think those are rather high-level examples, but there's more humble examples as well. Like we can imagine someone living a good life who is just a store clerk, or someone who is, we can imagine someone being a good father. I mean, that's one way of thinking about it. I mean, there's one classical interpretation of living a good life is performing excellently in all of the roles that you're engaged with. So being a good father, being a good son, being a good lover, being a good writer, whatever your activities are, the composite of the good life is just the sum of doing well in all of those activities. I think another way that the Greeks used to talk about goodness was by saying that you would live a virtuous life. And this is something that was slightly extracted from the idea of roles. Because once you know that you're like an excellent archer or whatever, you start to wonder what excellence is generally. And the virtues kind of come from that sort of a abstraction. The virtues are the idea that they're the qualities that will make you excellent in whatever role and whatever practice you're engaged in. And so, you can find lists of the virtues, the classical lists of the virtues anywhere, but, they're seen as habits which are not goal specific. I think that's an ennobling way to think about living well, because you can do it immediately and it doesn't require that you reach some point. You can be engaged with the virtues at every moment of your life. Now, I think most of that is a kind of moral perspective on it. And that's because I sense that from the question you're asking, goodness is specifically a kind of moral imperative. But I think the question of a good life opens up into areas that aren't classically moral. And so there are other perspectives that can inform us in as large a way as this idea of goodness and excellence and virtues and role models. There are these alternative camps, like the sort of Buddhist Taoist approach to come at the importance of life in terms of awakening rather than goodness. It's a very different model. It's not about what you do in the world, it's about realizing some fundamental truth and seeing some fundamental truth more and more clearly and helping others to see that. That's sort of, I think, the dominant lens of that model. It's not excellence, it's awakening. And I think that beyond that, there's a third level, which is even slightly more difficult to put into the idea of goodness, but it still operates with a lot of influence when you talk about the ways you should be living your life. And for lack of a better word, I think that this idea centers around what you could call destiny, or all of the areas that are very personal to you and creative. It's not as if Mozart or Nietzsche or any great artist you can think of had what you would really think of as a moral obligation to do their art. I think a lot of the times it felt very messy to them, and it was very personal, and they felt that their baser desires were being activated in it. But yet it has its own kind of morality to it because of this pull of destiny or creation or whatever you want to call it. They were serving the forces of history. And these are kind of amoral forces, but they're so permanent and central that if all you're thinking about is morality and awakening, you're missing this third component, which has to somehow do with the love of life in its animal components and in its desiring components and its creation. This is much more active and and much less self-negating than the other two forms. But I do think that it forms a great part of what we could consider a good life. Okay, I'm done. That was way too much on that. Next question. Do you find hope for humanity? If so, what key elements do you see as needed at a foundational level? Perhaps this question is impossible with an unknown, ever-changing future. I think kind of inherently I find hope for humanity. I don't have a good explanation for it. I just find that humans are very lovable and that I don't expect them to stop making mistakes. Now, do I honestly think that humans are going to make it out alive? I mean, probably not forever. In a way, it's funny to ask about what key elements I see as needed at a foundational level in reference to having hope in humanity, because it's sort of like saying, what do you think we need to add to humans to change their foundation? Or what do we need to add to humans to make them not human? And maybe that will be happening with AI and technology and things like Neuralink. I don't know that will change. One concern that I have is that spiritual traditions, pretty profound spiritual traditions and moral traditions, have been around for a really long time. It seems as if they've only ever made their mark on a relatively small group of people. And they've had, diminishing ranges of influence beyond those small groups of people, but it's hard for me to imagine something like a mass spiritual awakening or a mass moral awakening on the level that might be expected to somehow turn Earth into a paradise of peace. I don't think I understand enough about the social dynamics of revolution to know how deep it goes. Because I think in obvious cases like the civil rights movement or maybe the hippie love era, we see people mobilizing at a mass level, but it's including all of these elements of trends, something becoming trendy and reaching just a critical mass point where it's really just kind of social influence causing the appearance of certain hyper-positive trends, but it's not necessarily that these trends are reaching down to everyone's guts. And I think that that's sort of what I'm concerned about whenever it comes to mass movements, is I don't know how deep they'll go. I really don't know what people need at a foundational level. I think it's mysterious why some people are okay and others aren't. I think it's even more mysterious why certain people operate half-consciously and others seem to operate at a high level of questioning and interest in the world. A lot of this will hinge on whether or not progressivism is true, or whether or not education actually changes people, or if it's just kind of sheep herding, and that the people who are going to become profound and wonderful people, it was in some capacity, it was built into their DNA. But I work with clients therapeutically, and to some level, I do believe in the mechanics of change. And I think that part of it is recognizing how small they are. For example, having a client make their bed or reduce their medication or begin to go on a bike ride even once a week or something, like this might seem like small change to most people, but for someone who's operating at a certain level of suffering and dysfunction, it's really it's really phenomenal that they still have that capacity to change. So I guess the question is, what is it that can cause people to change as much as they can, and as positive as a direction as they can? You know, I've been thinking about the ways, the effective ways in which this can be done, and I guess there's a few different main categories. The first is kind of simple, and that's telling the truth, or truth-telling. And that's what the spiritual teachers are very good at. The problem with that is that it's very annoying for anyone who doesn't already care about hearing the truth told to them to go out and seek it. So those sorts of teachers tend to only be useful for people who are already seeking the truth. So there's another class of people, and this is kind of who the therapists deal with. And those are people who know that they have a problem, but they want to be heard. They don't necessarily want someone to guide their life and tell them what the mysteries of the cosmos are and what's the best possible way they could be living. They just want to stop hurting so much. And it seems that the most effective tool in that situation is to listen to them. This is, to listen to them and to care for them, but not necessarily to suggest anything to them. Now, I think one other thing that's been crossing my radar lately as an effective means of change is people getting in contact with what you might consider to be their physical, unconscious, or creative wisdoms. And this could be done through sort of one of the infinite art practices like writing or film or painting or whatever. But I think for most people, it can be more commonly achieved through something like meditation or somatic exercises. And that seems to have an effective durability of change that just thinking through actions doesn't. So I guess those are three routes that I do believe have the ability to change people at the right place and time. At the end of the day, I don't believe that it does us too much good to try to grasp this issue as tightly as we can and worry about how we're going to reform humanity. Alan Watts talked about this a lot. He pointed out that maybe the best thing you could do to save the world is stop being so concerned about the world ending and what you're going to do to help it. There's something neurotic in that very deliberate desire to alter things, which I believe contributes to suffering. Okay, that's about it. If anyone has any more questions they want to ask me in the comments, post them and I'll make another video in response. All right, take care, y'all.